the New York Times had a big investigation confirming what we've all known for a very long time, which is that members of Congress have been engaging in insider trading. What the Times adds is a couple of things. One, they add their imprimatur, so now Pelosi's going to get asked about it, and she's going to get pressured on it. They also add numbers. So they do a sophisticated database analysis, and they come up with saying that roughly, close to over 90 members of Congress had made thousands of trades, and at least a third of them were conflicts of interest, like clearly appeared to be conflicts of interest. And they had a lot of exclusions that would have pushed their number up even higher. So, and what they were trying to say is we're doing this in the most conservative possible way, and we're still finding eye-popping amounts of corruption. They carved out Pelosi, for one, because she doesn't sit on any committees, and their entire rubric was around committees. They also carved out the Ways and Means Committee, that's the committee that does not just tax policy, but now tax credits. Right. And so it used to be that was the revenue, the ways and means that you fund a government. Now it's also spending, because we do so much spending through tax credits, the child tax credit, energy tax credits, you name it. And so they said, you know what, because these members of Congress have jurisdiction over the entire economy, we could say that every single one of their trades was and is a conflict of interest. So
that's the point.
I know. So they're therefore we're not going to count those. It's okay, all right.
Maybe we just count all of them.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, basically, you could count basically every trade.
Yeah, of course.
Because the obvious answer, they shouldn't be allowed to do this, but they do this. Now, I mentioned this before. There is a kind of unspoken or unwritten, at least, bargain that's gone on that members of Congress have not gotten a raise for many years, because just the politics of voting yourself a pay increase are just going to dominate then the next election.
And they already make a lot more than the average.
They make $174,000 a year. And so it's very hard to come to somebody who's making the median salary and say that I needed a little bit extra, because once you're explaining, you're losing. You're like, I got an apartment in D.C., I've got my family back here, I've got my
right. AOC made that argument recently.
And what was it, Sean Duffy?
Yeah, Sean Duffy years ago.
And I sympathized with his point.
100%. Yeah. He's got 6, 7 kids. And AOC is right. You have to maintain 2 properties in very high rent areas. So it's not the most sympathetic case, but it is somewhat valid.
Right. And so the kind of unwritten bargain was all right, we're not going to raise your pay, but look how much money you can make on the side.
Right, and incentivizes it absolutely.
Which is just insane.
And there's a couple of things that are not sympathetic cases, but that do incentivize corruption in Washington, D.C. One is the low amount of money, relatively low amount of money compared to the private sector that Hill staffers make, and the other's Congress. And again, not sympathetic cases. You don't want to go to the mat for that, but I do think higher pay in both of those cases would probably disincentivize, especially on the staffing side, some revolving door activity, because it's so incredibly lucrative to go to the other side, to go to the dark side, and to do it very quickly. But on the members' side, some of them have legitimate needs for more money, but not everybody is maintaining 2 properties in
and most
New
of them
York
are so
and
rich.
DC.
Yeah.
Most of them are independently wealthy, coming into Congress. So a lot of them do not have any incentive. I mean, when we're looking at some of the names on here, and the graphic from the tear sheet that the New York Times has is great, because you see of these 183 current senators or representatives who reported a stock trade or another financial asset by themselves or an immediate family member, it's perfectly split down red and blue.
Right,
perfectly split down Democrats and Republicans on both the House and the Senate side, which is just a beautiful illustration of exactly how this works. It's like the best bipartisan grift in Washington. Ryan, I'm also curious as your take. The Ways and Means point is a really good one. Some of these numbers, I think, are just Unusual Whales tracks this on a more, and Crystal and Stalker cover Unusual Whales a lot, and they should, covers it on a more instantaneous basis. So we can sort of see the rolling trades that people like Paul Pelosi are making. It is really difficult to look at the Times analysis. It's so general to a certain point that it's okay, so they say their wife's doing it, and they say that they don't ever talk to their wife about this, or they say they never talk to their broker about this. Well, did they then talk to their spouse who then talked to the broker. There's a lot of slippery language.
Right, and they get into some trades and they put some of their best ones at the very top, where you're like, yeah, you're kind of busted. Like you've got Tommy Tuberville is I think their first example, where he's trading cattle futures, and he said
he's on the ag committee,
and he told a reporter that the ag committee's been talking a lot about cattle prices.
He also so he also told the Times that his broker makes the trades, that he does not.
The broker makes the trades,
right? But that he has nothing to do with it. Mm-hmm. So right, exactly, yes. And so that's why clearly the solution to this is no trading while you're in Congress, because there's absolutely no legitimate way to provide oversight and to know whether they're being honest. Also, they filed their disclosures really late. In a lot of cases, they're out of compliance with even the Stock Act. That's 2012, right? That was the 2012 piece of legislation.
After a Pelosi and a Boehner scandal. Or Pelosi and Spencer Bacchus,
Yeah, it was, and the Pelosi.
All of them, yeah.
There's a study also quoted in this long Times piece, what is it, from Cornell or I think it's from one of the Ivies, showing that they didn't outperform.
It said the stocks didn't outperform.
Exactly.
And it's like, okay, but how closely did you track that? Because you can track, you don't know how much they bought, but you know what day they bought.
Right.
And so you can track it that way. So, but this is putting more pressure on Pelosi, who has claimed that she's going to do something about this. She was asked about this at a press conference. Let's roll that shot here.
Yeah, I'm not big on New York Times and their investigations, but if that's what your premise is, here's the thing: members have been working on this. Just because somebody introduces a bill doesn't mean it becomes the law of the land. There's been discussion about it, and just recently, this morning, actually, the committee. We've been going back and forth, and they were refining things and talking to members about what they think will work. And we believe we have a product that we can bring to the floor this month. Exciting.
Congressional staff?
Well, you know what? When the bill comes out, you'll see what it is, and those are some of the discussions that go back and forth. But I'm pleased with it. It's very strong, but again, in order, just because, what do they say, they have 60, that's not even a quarter of what we need, a third of what we need to pass a bill.
The question from the reporter there, if you couldn't hear it, was, will this include congressional staff? Mm-hmm. Which is a huge sticking point on the Hill, because guess who has a ton of power on Capitol Hill? The people that write the bills, particularly the chiefs of staff. These are people who, I think their max salary is also $174,000, which is a lot of money. It's also, for many of them, a quarter of what they could make next week. Mm-hmm. And as you get older, as you have more kids, they call it going downtown. There's this phenomenon on the Hill where one kid, they might stay for a little bit. They have their second kid, boom, they're going downtown.
Going downtown.
So anyway, we'll find out if staff are involved in this, because I think that's a really essential point. I think the other answer is you got to pay the staff a lot more.
Probably.
Just as you have to, we understand this when it comes to the CFPB, the OCC, like a lot of these financial regulators, we pay them these kind of market rates. Like some of these regulators are making $300,000-$400,000 a year, which might be actually still less than they'd be making out in the private sector, but it's a lot of money, and you can live comfortably on it. And you don't want to get into an arbitrage type place where there's so much financial incentive for you to sell yourself out. And so the public, in a lot of ways, is going to get what it pays for. And if you don't pay your public servants, somebody else is going to pay them.
Yes, that's true. Well, and the other way to attack this problem would be to strengthen revolving door laws. And there are obviously some on the books, but you can. I mean, I do think a salary increase is probably, especially because you can actually even go back to like what Newt Gingrich's congressional reforms were in the 90s and say, frankly, Congress is understaffed and it's allowing lobbyists to do the work.
That was the point, to privatize the lawmaking.
To let special interests come in and, fill in the gaps where there's no staff to do it. So there's
like the way that API wrote Joe Manchin's permitting reform bill. Like
they had the stamp.
They put it out with the API watermark.
It had the watermark on it. Yeah, but
usually you have to go to the metadata to see which lobbyists wrote the legislation. This one, they just put the watermark right on it.
I also enjoyed Nancy Pelosi giving her stamp of approval to the bill, saying it's very strong and I'm very pleased with it, as though that would matter to any. If Nancy Pelosi is happy with a piece of legislation on insider trading, I am going to assume it is terrible.
Or she's retiring.
Right, yeah, she's getting out.
Jeff Merkley also said yesterday, Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon, that it doesn't look like they're going to vote on this in the Senate because they need 60 votes over in the Senate. I think the House will still vote on it just because actually they're even more likely to vote on it if the Senate assures them that it's not going to become law. They're saying that they're going to come back. It's going to be an interesting lame duck because they also said they're not going to vote on codifying marriage equality because they don't yet have the 10 Republicans that they need, but they think that they'll be able to get them after the election because maybe after the election you get a bunch of the retiring senators. I know Portman's retiring, Blunt's retiring. I don't know if they're on the bill yet or not, but they might want to not be on it for whatever political reasons yet, but after the election, you might be able to get 10, 15. And I think after the election, maybe you can get 10 Republicans to sign on to a ban. But how expansive the ban is really important. We're going to have Ro Khanna on the show later. He won't be on during this first hour and a half show that we're putting out because he can't join till later, but we'll post his interview later today. And we'll ask him about this. He's actually mentioned in this New York Times article because his wife is super wealthy.
Right.
And his wife was trading a bunch of stocks that he had some jurisdiction over, and we can ask him about that. But it also raises a question: what do you do about spouses? And because that's the Pelosi always says, I don't trade any stocks. Her husband's basically an investor.
Right.
So what do you do if you're married to an investor? Like, you got your spouse now has to leave the industry. I'm actually okay with that. Like,
yes.
There are only 435 members of Congress, and it should be a privilege to serve the public.
Yes.
And that means your entire family has to be along for the ride. But we don't have that sense of civic virtue in this country anymore.
Not at all.
I think the idea that a spouse should have to change their job because somebody's serving the public, I think for most people would seem radical. I think they should, because it's just their civic duty. But I don't see much hope for that.
It should be shameful and it should be embarrassing to be in Paul Pelosi's situation, which is that you are trading on public service, that you are using.
Or you seem like it.
Right.
You say you're not, but you sure seem like it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the
do you ever talk to your wife?
Right.
About work?
They have been doing this for years. I mean, this goes back years and years with the Pelosis. So I think it's just utter nonsense. And the question of, spouses is a good one. The other thing that these studies that claim, they'd be better off if they had, based on the evidence, they'd have been better off if they had their money in index funds. You're not really going to be able to measure the losses they avoid. Right. That's another, if you're.
Well, you sort of can based on annual rates of return.
I guess you can, but I think it's also very difficult to quantify what they're not doing.
Yeah.
Based on information that they might have had.
They certainly feel like they're doing well. Otherwise, they wouldn't be resisting this in the face of so much political pain. I
mean, and there are certain trades that are just glaringly obvious. I mean, it's almost, you can just say with 99% certainty, this is what happened, and you avoided. I mean, the COVID stuff was a good example.
Yeah.
If ever
right. How Richard Burr stayed out of jail. They have him busted, coming out of that classified briefing. Chris Collins did go to jail.
Yeah,
right?
He literally went to jail.
Burr comes out, calls his brother-in-law or whatever, calls his broker, his brother-in-law and him both all dumped their stocks after coming out of this meeting. And they seize his phone, and they do the whole investigation, and they just let it slide. SEC is apparently still investigating him, so we'll see where that goes. But even when you've got somebody dead to rights, and you can't nail them, then that it's basically an unenforceable law. So you just got to go further and just say, look, put your stuff in a blind trust, which brings us back to Joe Manchin, who owns a coal company. And he says, well, my coal company's in a blind trust.
Don't worry about it.
You know what it is. It's a coal company.
My coal company is in a blind trust.
At least that's what I'm told.
Oh, well.
Run by his son.
Yeah.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.